Thank you and welcome everybody. As Tom mentioned, my name is Julie Knox and I'm coming from Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in the US. And have you ever had that nightmare where you arrive at your big presentation only to discover your material still unfinished and you're really not ready to present? Step into my world. But no, don't hit the button quite yet because this presentation, actually the slides, the script, and even the run sheet are in the can, they're written, you do have a presentation, but at the same time, this presentation, it's an evolution. And today you're seeing the second edition. The first run of this was 4 months ago when I was doing my one-on-one performance review with my manager. And the reason I say this is still an evolving presentation is that there's what I'm looking at to be some really interesting nuggets. And they're starting to beg for what's the third generation of this presentation. And you'll also notice that throughout the materials and what my presentation even says, the title keeps changing because I'm not sure what the title is, and it's all ready for its third presentation. So this is, it's an evolving story, and it emerged from a project post-mortem or a lessons learned assessment. And what was interesting about this one is we needed to do a lessons learned to figure out why did everything just go so right. It was a fast moving project. It was firm deadlines. It was stressful and it was fun. And it was going so well that we didn't want to admit to how well it was going because we were afraid that we were going to jinx ourselves. It just felt that good and not quite right. And it was weird and wonderfully weird. And so by doing these presentations, it's a way to encourage myself to sort of dig deeper into why did it go right? And more so, how can we do more of it? And so it's sort of presenting our version of the 1993 comedy movie Groundhog Day, which was starring Bill Murray. And first poll for all of you that you can go to the chat for. And I'm actually not watching the chat, so it's actually sort of a conversation amongst yourselves. The movie Groundhog Day, do you even know which movie I'm referring to? Or did I pull an analogy that's just not clicking with any of it? And you're like, what the heck is she talking about? So question one, what do you know Groundhog's Day? But the synopsis is, Bill Murray, he's in a time loop. He's repeatedly living one day over and over and over again. And every day he wakes up, it's Groundhog's Day all over again. And so after you answer, do you know which movie I'm referring to? Your next question to answer in your chat is, and exactly what is a groundhog and why does it matter? But I'll leave you all to that. To set the scene for this movie, we've got a process that it's the most kind way that I can describe it is to say that it's clunky. It's like that 1974 old Cutlass I drove. It had a carburetor. We never could quite get that carburetor to be timed right and things just never quite ran smooth. That's this process. And we cycle through it like 2,000 times a year. And on top of it, the final product is actually visually very unappealing. And the final step, a good portion of the time, like a third of the time, they keep forgetting to even do that step. So we've got this centralized process, lots of variation. And then for a movie, who's the cast? Well, we've got some very highly motivated team members. There was some restructuring and the responsibility for this process was changing offices. And I have to tell you, the office that was receiving it was very motivated to make a change. And every good storyline is going to have your antagonist and some conflict and some consequences. Ours, well, it was paycheck related. It impacts all faculty, as in all faculty, our part-time, our full-time, even our tenured faculty. And we had a go live of only 4 months out. And the next wrinkle is the fact our business managers who were going to be using it, we were looking at how can we change the process using DocuSign, and not a single one of them had used DocuSign in the past. So that was a setup for where we were. And I am checking, oops. Can you tell me, is my screen being shared? Do you see my presentation at this point?
No.
All right, I will stop the share and share now. And I was not intending to share it up till now, so you're not missing anything yet. I did just lose my Zoom control, so let me find that next screen. The other joy is this is the first time actually doing a presentation from within inside of Zoom. I'm either presenting inside of Teams or I am participating in Zoom, and I think I found where I need to go. My magic share button, screen 3. Do you now see a title slide?
Yes.
Brilliant, thank you. All right, so that was the lead up into this presentation. And I told you, the thing that we were producing was not visually attractive. Here's a screenshot of what it used to produce. And a note on style. This presentation was based on how much difference we had when we ran it as a pilot. And this presentation is also intentionally done in that same spirit. You're going to notice slides that may seem odd or disjointed, and the look, there's no common theme across these slides, because with a pilot, we're trying to discover, what's our minimal requirements we need, how do we resolve the hurdles, how do we hit the critical points. And so I intentionally brought in slides that were just good enough for this presentation to sort of bring you into the spirit of it being a pilot. But for this demonstration, here's a visual of what a contract used to look. We've got it all scrunched onto one page because our process, some of the process limitations that our business directors were very motivated to keep it to a one-page document. So the font kept getting smaller, the margins kept getting smaller, and all the key information that you as a faculty member might want to read is in small font buried inside the paragraph, such as things like, what's my pay? So we did not have a very visually appealing product. This is a view during the process of what it would look like to sign your contract from within DocuSign. And, we gave it a new look, a new format, but it was a major shift in thinking is all the critical information that you first want to look at. We took it out of the paragraphs. We pulled it to the top of the page, made it bold. And it also resulted in, we had to rethink how our paragraphs were written. And this top portion had so many different combinations of how it could be entered. Those bottom paragraphs had to keep making sense legally, regardless of which combination of contract we put in the top half. The process, you all have processes like this. When you first look at them, they look relatively simple. And this was a graphic that we were using across the university. We didn't want to distract them with a swim lane and those kind of details, but as a quick graphic of, what are the steps? What does it take to get a contract out to one faculty member and get it signed and returned back? And even though it looks really simple, the more you look at it, the more you find. The more you find, there's more reasons not to like it. And it left me thinking, how have we allowed ourselves to keep such bad processes existing? And for this presentation, my example is faculty contracts. You have your own processes that are unique to your university that are probably as apparently simple and hopefully not quite as ugly as ours truly was. But equal opportunity, we kept finding what was bad with our process. We did ask, what's good? Well, the biggest point was it was familiar. We had 10 colleges, 10 business directors, and they all felt comfortable and they knew how to do their portion. That was what was good about the process. As we were still developing it, we had a vision of what we might like to turn the project into and how we could take 80% of the processing out of it and actually use a tool. So that was sort of the process. Going into, what had to change? We're looking at policy level changes. If we were going to go into DocuSign, we were going to convince people that they didn't have to use their college letterhead, or it wasn't going to be the dean's letterhead. It was going to be the university letterhead for everybody. The dean stamp was going to show up as a digital stamp, and we had to update language in the contract itself. So we're looking policy level, It's going to have to pass through legal or Office of General Counsel. And these are also going to be shiny things that people are going to notice. We're not sneaking this process change under anybody's nose. And, it's that proverbial third rail. And here's your next poll question. Third rail. If I use the analogy third rail, is that something you guys use in your discussions? And I actually, knowing that it was a large audience from many different cultures, I actually took a moment and said, what does third rail actually apply to when I use it? And, it's something that's dangerous to tamper with. And it is alluding to the electrical rail systems that went into place like in the 1918 in the US. And the quote also claims that it's primarily heard in the US. So, the question for the chat is, do you use the third rail analogy in your organization? And is it that dangerous thing that you try and stay away from? So we definitely had some of those third rail things that most projects try to stay away from if at all possible. And we were going at them head on. Additionally, there was plenty of messy things that we had to work with. We had one standard way that we were meant to do contracts. We had 10 colleges doing them, which meant we had at least 25 different ways that we were doing these contracts with one standard process. So there's some of the setup. And now, with a good movie, you always need some sort of a new drama that happens in the middle. And there was early or halfway through the project, we found ourselves in a whirlwind. And this is where the word pilot first started emerging. This was our project that almost wasn't even a project. We're meeting back with our champion, talking about what it's going to take to be ready for April 1st, because April 1st, which ironically is April Fool's Day, is the day that our university sends full contracts to all full-time staff. So we had to be ready for an April 1st go live, which corresponded to April Fool's Day. And as we're talking through what still has to happen for us to potentially hit April 1st, he's like, and you're thinking, what? Do you realize how big this thing is? There's no way you guys are rolling this thing out April 1st, says the champion who wanted it. Now, going back to my motivated team member, she's thinking, oh my goodness, if this thing doesn't go live, it's all on me, baby. And so she recollected herself and she said, well, we've got these two colleges who are really motivated and they're putting a lot of effort in. What can we do? And he said, well, okay, we'll ask permission to let these two colleges pilot it for April 1st for some of their contracts. A week later, he's in front of the Dean's Council getting permission to start these few little pilots. And he put one phrase in there saying, well, and anybody else who wants to join, they're welcome to join as well. So in 2 weeks, we went from nearly ending the project to introducing the idea of a pilot and then said, oh, let's just open up the doors and let anybody into our pilot. And the standing joke within our office was, and Julie, and exactly how do you spell pilot? Because in sense of a pilot, we certainly were not piloting when it comes to volume. When we ran our first phase, 8 of our 10 colleges opted into using the new process. And of the contracts that were sent on April Fool's Day, a third of them did go through DocuSign, and they all got signed. And then this slide is the report out that we had in August, sort of telling people where we were overall. And so we had run 6 pilots, 4 phases because there were full-time faculty. Then we got into summertime teaching contracts, part-time contracts. Our 4th phase was fun because our 9th college who opted out of it, they had a scheduling crisis and they said, Julie, we got these 120 contracts that need to go out this week. How can you make DocuSign work? And this is one of those slides where there's a nice formal version of it, but as we were working through, and how do we express, it wasn't just that we sent so many contracts out, but what did results look like? So here's a quick pause moment, because up till now, you saw what was interest to university. What were the results? Going forward is more from the practitioner's lean HE perspective, but how did we do it? What to consider going forward? And I'm focused on the fact that it's pilot, but there's a couple of other couple other elements that were key was, seeking to understand what ideas are free and managing or even over managing your champion. And with ideas are free, it's our frontline employees. In this case, it was our 10 business directors who know how things really do work, regardless of being a standard process. And it's going to be those small ideas that allow us to pay exceptional attention. And there's a reference that comes from manufacturing that talks about, the 25 square feet that I would work in, which is 2.3 square meters. But, within my workspace, the project team needs to respect that. Within my space, I'm the expert. No one else quite understands. And was seeking to understand, we quite quickly, our project team opened up to where we had our executive champion, and Howard Tybel, and I've got a couple other elements from him, talks about a project team often groups into 1/6, 2/3, and a sixth. And you've got your change agents. Those are two people who definitely want to drive it. And then they had their other 8 colleagues there. And we had, as the 10 colleagues were talking with the executive champion, it allowed them to make sure that they were being heard by the senior leader. Senior leader was hearing firsthand with all the accompanying passion what was involved with this. And the two of us who were hanging off the edge certainly got a lot of insight into what was happening. So our first month was really focused on seek first to understand what the process is, how many different challenges are out there. The second month, with this being a sort of a crash 4-month project, was what I'm calling overmanage my champion. We were looking at impacting all faculty. It was related to payroll. We were not hiding this policy change. And if this thing was going to succeed long-term, it was going to take guidance from our champion. He was going to be the person who was going to take these processes through legal. And also when we hit those proverbial bumps in the road and issues arose and went straight to the top, he needed to be in place to actually respond to it and keep things moving. And there was probably a 3-week process. We were over managing. We had 4 simultaneous lists going. What do we need leadership to do? What are those review things we're putting on him? But baked into it, what were those assumptions behind them? What decisions did we make? And what were those questions and issues? So we knew we kept circling back to it. And with this being a short project, thankfully, we did not have to micromanage this for too long. And hence the format never got very attractive. It was sufficient. Into more of the idea of a pilot, Howard Tybel. And I reached out to Howard. He gave me permission to grab a couple screenshots from his video. If you do look up Howard Tybel, and this is pro-sci, and he specifically looks at bringing significant change into higher education Oregon. This is from a 6-minute video. And this is where it's like, 1/6 of your change agents. You've got 2/3 in the middle, and then your resistance is over here in the left, in the final 6th. And how did this play out from a pilot? How did we do it differently? Those 8 colleagues sorted themselves out. When the deans had the option of opting in, one of our deans chose to opt out. And what I later referred to as our 9th college, our business director there was retired within 2 months. And so that college opted out. We had another person who put herself over here on the resistance side, and it was like, oh, here comes one more improvement effort that really is just another shift of work onto me. Thanks so very much. But so she was the reluctant person, but she didn't stop us from moving forward, but she was definitely a minimal user. And we had our other people in the middle. And how looking back, we actually ran with this. And it was, in hindsight, we didn't realize how good of a job we did. We kept our effort focused on those 2 change agents. We went as fast as they could handle. And sometimes we had to slow down. Other times they had to speed us up. But as they had questions, as they said, well, what about, can we do this? We kept bringing out the material at the pace that one of them was asking for. But we also had to take special care of our 5 people in the middle. We couldn't afford to lose them. And we did have one of our members saying, oh, I think it's gotten too far. I lost myself. I think I'm going to step off the bus and join the folks who are coming in later. And it was it was the, yes, you can. We would love for you to step off, but hey, why don't we meet for 1 hour? And what was nice is in an hour session with just one-on-one, we got through her questions. She stayed on the bus, and she also brought in an important perspective, because she was doing contracts that were faculty contracts for librarians. So, she didn't quite fit a lot of the conversations, hence she wasn't quite sure if she wanted to stay. But then she was a critical view that we would have missed in our solution had we not kept her there. And then the acknowledging resistance. And this, Howard does some really good work with how do you introduce large change into an organization? And where I was struggling was the fact that how he was going to handle oh boy, here comes more change being thrown at us, and how we managed to work with her were I wouldn't say diametrically opposed, but they were different. And so I sought back to say, what was different and how did I adapt? And, for these first power things, opportunity to engage your difficult style, this was definitely this business director. She asked our tough questions. She made our project stronger. As she was getting on board, her buy-in and support actually made more people willing to join. But where I struggled with it was coming out of, team-based problem solving, which isn't, how do you present change to a large organization, but how do you work with a diverse group of people and help them develop a solution? We would never leave that naysayer behind. We had to make sure that we wrap that person in and to make sure that she at least didn't oppose the solution outright. So managing the resistance was a blend between those two philosophies. And, the intent of running the pilot, it was an exploratory. We ran 6 different types of contracts. We were looking at, is DocuSign even feasible? It was a risk mitigation strategy, because they could always fall back into that lovely existing process that they had honed over the years. And this one is, what did this effort deliver? On the left-hand side, where I call like my lowercase v value, it was the faculty experience improved. That last process step that so often wasn't happening is we had to get a final copy of the contract to the provost office to go into the permanent record. We missed that a third of the time in the old process. And of course, the transactional workload and process metrics, we never had process metrics. Those are all good and meaningful. But as I look forward, it's that what I call the capital V value is, we're within a few years of having to replace our existing ERP system. We're going to go to the cloud. And today our ERP business operations system is a different system than our student information system. We would love to see those come together into one. So there's a lot of new systems work coming up. The capacity building for those 10 business directors to collaborate and look for processes. We also are a very siloed organization. And so bringing the 10 colleges, one person per college together, we broke down a few of those silos. There's still a lot way to go. And even more so, it's helping people say, yeah, we're comfortable with our existing process, but darn, look what they're costing us, and helping them build the dissatisfaction that we have to change. No matter how awkward change can be, we're trying to build that capacity that change has to come, and they're going to want to join us. So, the key elements looking back, there was the magic of the fact that it was a pilot and they opted in. And so, my major disgruntled person who also happens to send probably 40% of all the contracts because she's in the biggest college, keeping her in just enough was a difference. The fact that we were pacing ourselves on the pilot of who our early adopters were, going no faster, no slower than what they could handle. The other piece was, because we were doing it in phases of pilot projects, we could say, oh, April 1st, good enough for now. And they, amongst the 10 of them, they were building confidence that when we said good enough for now and we'll come back in the next phase, they started believing us. And when I got my key resistor to express that same thing, I was like, whoa, we made it. We're golden. The idea, I was using the word pilot, and in a lot of methodologies, we might think of that going around the plan, do, check, act process. I was moving towards a term that I was calling try-storming. Instead of brainstorming, let's try-storm things. One of the things I picked up yesterday, and I don't know if it was Simon's presentation or one of the other ones, instead of thinking to how we're going to build it, let's start building to think. And with the curves up above, we all know Tuckman's model, where we've got a team that's going to go from forming to storming, norming, into performing. And in hindsight, and I was pulling this together just this morning, is yes, we were on one of those curves, but because we were doing it as pilots, we were actually driving that, we were doing micro versions of that curve. And so the shape of the curve wasn't that one nice, smooth gray curve. It was a series of smaller black curves that were building on themselves with each succession. The other piece with this being a pilot was over managing my champion for the first iteration. And we had to spend a long enough time in that seek to understand phase. If our 10 business directors didn't feel that they were truly understood, and if our champion didn't feel that we had captured what he was looking for and that we weren't just putting it on top of them, we would have never gone live. One last slide before we're going to open it up is, when I was looking back at, we got to April 1st, contracts went out. And then it was, oh gosh, we launched these things on April Fool's Day. Is the joke going to be on us? The contracts came in, they were getting signed. We were getting good feedback. And while we had our champion ready to handle all the disruption that might come out, like, what do you mean I got an e-sign? I'm not signing up for that. Or I got to use my Marquette email address. I can't use my personal email address. We were expecting to hear a fair amount of pushback from our audience. We're still waiting for that, 6 months in, and we haven't heard it yet. So, looking back at that point, it was like, why did this thing succeed? And, some of the references on the left are the sources that I found when I said, oh yeah, I did use this, and here's how we did it in the project. Looking forward, the idea of think to build versus build to think, I'm probably going to be working that into my vocabulary more than try storming. I'm going to wait for the next Lean HD discovery over these next 2 days. And with the curve item, is, I was looking for, give me a visual so I can get a nice shape of the curve. I also stumbled across an article with Tuckman Edison, to where it was the idea of, once you get to the back end of the curve where your team starts conforming and deforming and disbanding, how do we start the next wave? And so that's the next piece that I'm going to be thinking about in my job once this conference ends. And I would like to that's the end of the presentation. And I wanted us to have significant amount of time for the conversation amongst ourselves. So I'm going to stop the share. And as promised, I have not looked at any of our chat. I do see there's 20 something, 30 things going in there. So whether or not we start with a comments that came from the chat or voicing questions, I'm going to let my co-host take lead and send us on our way.
Thanks, Julie. Well, there was a couple of comments I can throw in right off the bat, just about the terminology that you use. There's a lot of love for it there. So make the executive champion look like a hero. That one's from William. Greg's like to create more dissatisfaction with current processes. That was genius. And I think there was some love there from Anne for tri-storming. I think that's an interesting concept as well. We're all obviously very familiar with brainstorming, so tri-storming there I think is a nice a nice new one there.
Are there any questions that are residing out there? And, I don't anticipate that any of you are going to take this and say, DocuSign, that's the tool I need, or I want to go out and I want to grab onto our faculty contracts. What I'm hoping is that this was sort of a nugget of an idea that's going to push you towards a different process or a different approach within your organizations. Anything coming to mind that you would like to share with the larger group?
We've got Kevin here with his hand up.
Go right ahead, Kevin.
Julie, thank you so much for this. My favorite comment that I'm taking away, where did it go? About, went as fast as you could with the change agents, no faster, no slower. That's definitely a golden nugget for me. I appreciate that.
And that's one of the things I've done wrong so often. These change agents, they've got a normal job to do. And, this is added to them where I get to dedicate a fair amount of time. So in past projects, it wasn't uncommon that I outstripped my change agents. So pausing to only go at their speed made a world of difference. And you had another comment, Kevin.
Yeah, well, and I was kind of thinking, like, if I have a set pace that I'm expecting, if they can handle more, to let them. So I love that. Yeah, the question is, you had mentioned about the pilot, how it was open to anyone who wanted to join, and you had many, and it worked well. Would you have considered just doing one or two, and what would have been the difference of opening it up versus doing one or two for you?
We had to have the one or two to have, 2 points of view and to have 2 different sample sizes. But in reality, those 10 business directors were all doing the same thing. And I think the project was much richer because of that. We got the special case of, well, what about librarians? How is it different if it's a librarian versus a faculty member? And right now we're starting to work with the 10th college as we're starting to transition from, it's no longer a pilot you can opt into. This is the new policy. And so that 10th college is coming on board. That 10th college has just presented a new nugget this week is they have courtesy appointments. They have a couple part-time faculty who come back and teach pro bono. And the language in their contract is different. And so our first 9 colleges did not present us with any volunteer faculty members. So, I'm glad our 10th college wasn't in the front end because it would have been that much more complex. But we would be in a much worse place today if we didn't have at least 5 of those colleges to give us variety. And the way they opted in was interesting. My biggest resistor, when she said, you will have to do this, there were 3 types of contracts that went out in April. She joined the pilot for one of the 3, and she let her other 2 go the old way. And so it's like she dipped her toes in just enough so she was compliant because her dean opted her in. We didn't have to tell her we did it, but her dean opted her in. She was voluntold. And she had just enough space to operate being voluntold and have the freedom to still feel that she felt she controlled her job.
Julie, we've got a question here from Carter and then one from the chat as well. Carter, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jolie, for your presentation. It was really amazing to hear your experience. I really resonated with the comment that you made about making the senior executive look like the hero. I think Tom and I are working now in a project that I think we could steal that and use it. I was wondering, what did that look like in your project?
In making him look like the hero, the idea of changing contracts for all faculty, I was just waiting till April 2nd and hearing what kind of complaints. It was things like, what do you mean I have to approve this 9-page agreement? We were expecting some very significant pushback, and he had to be ready. I mean, he had the persona and he had the relationship that he could, successfully pull them in. we also needed him to have the details. Why did we choose to use work emails only and we couldn't send it to your personal email? Why did we get the dean stamp? Are you sure that's legal? So we were forecasting of what kind of issues could we hear from our users, and then what were the assumptions and the decisions, and over analyze and have it all spelled out. So when that question came and there was a lot of passion around it, we could actually hand Gary a couple talking points that he could go from. We haven't used them yet. And it was also, he was also the person who had to take the changes in language to general counsel. So we needed to make sure that he understood why he was taking the general counsel and what were the choices we considered and why we're recommending this one.
Awesome, thank you. We are working in a project where we will need senior executives to put their hand up to to drive change. So I think we can talk about that later, Tom. Thank you.
We have a question here, Julie, from William. If DocuSign didn't exist, would your future state process have led to the technology that looked exactly like DocuSign, or would it have been different?
I'm not sure what the final version would be, because it was a combination. I think our long-term solution is, I believe we're still going to be looking at a tool that says, how do you generate contracts? We were, up till now, what our people had been using is they had a Word document, a Word template, and they had the old-fashioned Excel mail merge. And each college made a few tweaks here and there in the language. Oh, wait, this one's going to be a courtesy appointment. Let me take these couple sentences out. So the idea that you could have paragraphs fly in or fly out based on criteria didn't exist in our version, on our understanding of how we're going to work with Microsoft Word. We got some workarounds on how to do it inside a DocuSign. If you are teaching in the School of Nursing, there's a whole extra paragraph that has to come in that doesn't exist for the other 9 colleges. And if you're teaching in the law school, there's another paragraph that flies in that there has to be 700 minutes of contact time for every credit hour. Thankfully, those are our only 2 examples of extra paragraphs, because our solution won't handle any more complexity. So there is that, how do you handle the different variations to build up this contract? And we need the faculty member to acknowledge that they accept it and that we get a final document. I'm not married to the idea that it has to appear as a signature. If there was another way that we could demonstrate that they approved it, like if it was built into our HR system, into our ERP system, and we were, they logged in and they sort of clicked something, I would love that. I would like to get us out of a email and a one-page document. And right now it's a PDF that has to go into a document management system. So we're still crazy clunky, and there's many more opportunities to come. So I'm hoping this is not our final solution.
Great. And then we had another comment from Linda in the comments. Lockdown overrode most objections to DocuSign in Cambridge. So I'm not sure if you had a similar experience, but obviously I think the technology meeting the social situation was a benefit there.
The technology was definitely, because of before, if we would have done this project 3 years sooner, these were still hard copy contracts that were placed in the hand of the faculty member. They were doing pen and ink, and we were scanning them. So they got the fact that we went to COVID and the contracts were delivered by email. They had to figure out how to sign them and get them back to us. And the business managers had many examples of, oh, they signed it and they took a photo and they sent me back a photo of just the signature page. And then they had to get the faculty member to re-image it and send it again. So there was a very strong buildup of these old contracts, and signing electronically just ain't working. Please help me. And if we didn't have COVID, we would not have done that in 4 months. So it was a COVID benefit.
I can see also Linda's comment, small steps win the day as well. And we've got one here from Misty. That was one of the best things to come out of COVID, updating all the processes and forms digitally. So I think that's a common thread throughout the group. Perfect. I can see we're almost out of time. Were there any final questions for Julie? No, not just yet. Well, yeah, a big congratulations, Julie. I really enjoyed that presentation. Fantastic. And I'd like to also thank everyone for coming along to see it today. I hope you are enjoying the Lean conference. If you are interested in Julie's work, she is presenting again tomorrow. So feel free to join that session. Otherwise, I'll let everyone move on to their next session and have a great, day or night, depending on where you are. Thanks, everyone.